So my name is Joe Lynch. I initially qualified as a teacher in 1983. So I've been working in education, really I've been working in education for 36 years. I've also gained qualifications around in psychotherapy, individual psychotherapy and group psychotherapy. But I've maintained really my work in education. I'm out of the classroom now for probably nearly 16 years. And the other thing is that I've worked in London and Dublin and in schools, and now I work in the Clare and Limerick region. So really the work is around how do we become inclusive. I mainly lead inclusive education. So I have specialisms around so how young people learn, how teachers teach. I'm a big specialist in the area of special needs. Didn't particularly like the language around special needs, but and I have a big interest in mental health and young people. And that's it, really. So I'm leading that kind of inclusively. So it's a very exciting time, I believe, to be a young person in Ireland today. Um, there's a lot of thought being put in by a lot of agencies, whether they're Department of Education or Department of Children or Department of Justice, Social Services, Child and Adult Mental Health. There's a lot of thought being put into, how we can support young people and their journey into adulthood in Ireland today. Because what we're trying to do as adults and professionals in this area is support young people's transition into adulthood, so we can create a society that is fair and respectable, irrespective of each person's experience, depending on where they're coming from themselves. So I think it's really, really exciting. Now, that doesn't take away from the fact that it's really, really challenging. And it is. And I think it always has been a little bit like that. But like more and more, we're getting to a place where we believe that young people have something hugely important to contribute to society. And we're getting our heads around that. More and more people, who the policymakers in the country around education and mental health and children and youth affairs, all those people who are making policy are now getting to the point where they're thinking we need to ask the young people. So I think that's very, very exciting for young people, notwithstanding that there are huge challenges for young people as well. One of the most difficult things that one of the most difficult messages that we need to give to young people is that their experience, though sometimes they feel it's quite difficult, they can develop strategies to cope with it. Um, if I was to break it into a few different sections, there is the preschool age, the primary school experience, the secondary school experience, and then third level or further training experience. So those stages reflect what I think are the most important aspects in a young person's life, and a lot of them involve transition. So there's a transition from home in the very beginning to primary school experience, and for the vast majority of people, that's a really positive experience for young people. What gets really, really difficult then is the transition into second level, which is the area that I've been working in for the last 36 years, believe it or not. But anyway, so the second level area is actually trying to hold a very, very difficult time in a young person's life, because there's a huge amount of transition happening on many, many different levels. So there's the whole physical change that's actually happening where the young person is moving into adulthood. The body is becoming the adult body, and that takes quite a number of years. That's really difficult. As I say, the H word comes into play. The hormones are beginning to kick in, and things are really, really challenging for young people, and they don't know it, but they feel it in their bodies. The brain. There's a massive amount of research, and I've only been reading a lot more about this in the last 10 or 15 years myself. The brain, the development of the brain is having a huge impact on young people. And it is the last organ in the body to actually finish growing. It stops growing at 25. So people are well into adulthood before the brain actually stops growing. In that second level period, that adolescent period, it's a massive transformation. And when we have massive transformation in our lives, we can actually feel a little bit out of control. So that's why systems have to be put into place by adults. Now, those adults are the parents, are the local community, are the policymakers at government level, or the policymakers at local government level, to actually support and assist that journey, that transition journey into adulthood, into creating a society that is, as I said earlier on, respectful and mindful of young people's individual experiences. So it's quite a complicated process. That's a great question, because I'm now going to kind of move into a little bit of psychology. Okay, so we have to have a sense of who we are. Now, that takes quite a long time. When I say quite a long time, it actually probably takes a full journey into deep adulthood. I'm talking about could be 30, 35, 40. Because, knowing who I am is probably one of the greatest questions. Actually, there's a very famous Hindu philosopher who I've read a lot, and his name is Sri Ramana Maharshi. And he says that the only question, I know this is going to sound a little bit strange now, but the only question that really is worth asking in this life is, who am I? Really, really, really. So that's really, the question really reflects the life journey. So coming back to your question around peer pressure, as a young person, we really don't know who we are. I didn't know who I was as a young person. So I'm deeply influenced by what I think other people think about me. I'm deeply influenced by what I think people are saying about me, or what I actually physically hear people saying about me. And then there's the whole media. Now, I get onto social media now in a second, but there's the whole media thing. Say, for example, around advertising. Should I have this pair of runners? Should I wear this top? Should I wear my hair this way? Should I use, there's that voice from society. And now, young people today are experiencing something that young people 5 years ago, just 5 years, and 5 years is a very, very, very short time, didn't experience. And that's the whole voice of social media. So again, not moving away. So they're the pressures. So we're all involved in that, and young people are seriously involved in all of that, and they have all these different voices, and there's where the pressure comes from. Because what we need to teach young people is to separate out those bits of pressure that are going to come naturally anyway, so that they learn what's important for them and what's not so important for them. So they can have the skill or develop their own voice around saying, you know what, I like those pair of runners, or, I should add 10 more people to my Snapchat or my Instagram account. But you know what, I have enough. So that we begin to teach people that, in order to develop slowly into adulthood, you have to be taught how to make those decisions, and, whether those decisions are correct or incorrect or not so correct, that you make them and you live with them. Um, what's really, really important around peer pressures is I actually utterly believe that we really, really need to teach young people to access their own voice. Now that's very easy to say, but how do you do it? And you do it in a way over a number of years. That's why the education system in many can last nearly 18, 17 years, 16 years. It's quite a long time. And we have to give that message to young people that it's really going to take a while to learn, even the basics of what it means to be a young person in this world. But young people have to access their own voice, and I'm pointing to my heart, that they have to know deep inside in themselves that what and who I am and what I have to say is really, really important. And, it takes away the idea too that, the best parent people to make decisions about young people as adults. It's not. They're very important, because they bring a lot of experience. But so the adult of, I'm quite old, I'm in my 50s. I don't know what it's like. I can observe it, I can see it, and I work with young people, but I don't have their reality of it. So I need to hear about it from them so that I can bring it in and incorporate it into the work that I do with the young people and the adults in their lives, be it teachers, parents, or other professionals. So peer pressure it's like the game, and we need to teach people the rules on how to manage and navigate that, so that the end result of the game is to develop the young person, not to overwhelm the young person. That's really the game, is to develop the individual. And then that individual feels connected to society, to the groups that they're involved in, to their classmates, to their schoolmates, to their community, to their football teams, to their drama groups, to their orchestras, whatever group they're involved with, and then they feel further connected into society. So we need to learn how to work with and manage peer pressure. But pressure isn't necessarily a negative thing. It can teach us a lot. It can overwhelm us, but it can teach us a lot as well. The challenges for parents today are to be in touch with the young people and the experiences that they're having. They can often say, I get them this and I get them that and I'll do this for them and I'll do that for them. But actually, in fact, what young people, what children really, really want is to be able to have conversations with their parents or not, but feel safe and secure in the knowledge that their parents are there. So how do we do that? How do we teach and how do we let them go? How do we give them the ideas of how to be in the world, and how do we let them off and how do we bring them back in? So it's a really, really tricky thing. I think one of the major challenges for parents today is social media. It really is. And the use of a platform that young people are having a conversation on a platform. And by the very nature, young people want to exclude their parents. That's part of growing up. But when that platform has become a very, very, very tricky place for young people, by young people and other influences within those things. And the parents need to be aware of that. That's one of the major challenges. I think parents also need to be more involved in their children's education. They need to develop conversations with schools, and the government actually realised that, and they should have had a parents and children's charter out last year or the year before, and I think that's just coming on board as well. So being involved in the lives of the children that they're parenting, but also letting them go. So it's that kind of in, out, getting the balance right, because the young person is only going to fully develop by understanding their own experience for themselves. But they need the refuge of the home. So Another way of answering that question is, how do you provide an environment where a young person feels safe to leave, but also feels safe enough to return to? And that's a really, really tricky thing to do. And that goes the same for schooling. You know, that schools need to provide an environment where the young people feel safe. So there, so buying them by, and for parents, and giving them loads and loads of stuff. Oh, okay, that's great. You know, they like to have the most modern things and up to date, or being too strict. It's actually finding the balance between being too strict or the permissive. Permissive being, you know, I need a new pair of runners. Okay, you can have those. That's no problem. I need to do this. That's fine. So the research would show that young people, even though they mightn't freely admit it, would kind of, researchers do this thing and ask young people, you know, the really important question. They really want to be able to have conversations and spend time with their parents, even though they kind of say, no, I don't really want that. But that's what they really want. So parents have to find ways of facilitating that, again, allow the young person to explore the world that they're moving into. So that it's a really good question because it's so tricky. And a lot of people say, oh, I want the best for my young person. I want this for that. And I say, yeah, that's great. Great. I was with a young person recently that were finding school really, really difficult. And I remember the parents saying, I just want the best for her. And I thought, that is so cool to hear a parent saying that. But then the question inside in my head was, how do we do that? You know, how do we get the young person to take responsibility? How do we take the school to take responsibility? How do we take the parent to take responsibility in facilitating that to happen? And again, that happens over a very, very long period of time. One of the really important things, I think, too, is parents admitting they've made a mistake. We really need to be able to say, look, I made a mistake, I'm sorry, and they need to kind of reconnect, rebuild the relationship, because sometimes that can happen too. Adolescence especially is a very, very stressful time. You're going through a lot, and then somebody makes a mistake, a parent makes a mistake, and they feel a little bit helpless. So what they should try to do is, or try to achieve, is reconnect and repair the relationship. Because, by the way, no relationship, whether it's between a parent or a child and a child, a partner and a partner, no relationship is perfect, and we have to work with that imperfection. So no parent is going to be the perfect parent, even though they want to be the perfect parent. There's a lovely writer called Donald Winnicott who spoke a lot about parenting, especially the relationship between the mother and the child. And he developed a phrase called the good enough mother. So nobody's perfect. So it's the good enough parent, the good enough teacher. So it's like 80% perfection. Perfection is 80%, and we're striving towards that 80%. So we could be at 20, 30, 40, 50 sometimes. Sometimes we could be 75. Sometimes it could be perfect at 80. But we're never perfect at 100 because it's too perfect. Because that's not life. Life is wonderful, but life is also full of flaws and challenges. And there are events going to happen in young people's lives that parents are going to have to learn how to manage. So coming back to what I was saying earlier on, say for example the movement from primary school into secondary school, that's one of the big transition periods that's going to happen in all our lives. How does a parent manage that? By talking, by listening, by asking for support, asking for help, and and saying, look, I made a mistake there, I need to go back and try this again, reconnect and repair. I'm all about. There's a wonderful musical by a guy called Stephen Sondheim called Into the Woods, and actually Disney have just made a film about 4 or 5 years ago of it, and he uses a book by a guy called Bruno Bettelheim, Fairy Tales and Enchantment, and he kind of weaves all the different fairy tales into the movie Into the Woods. But it's all about that movement of letting the child go and and bringing them back, letting them take risks and then giving them refuge. And one of the lines of the song is, how do do you say to a child in the night, nothing's all black, but then nothing's all white? And it's that kind of dance. And we want the best, but we have to work towards the best. And it's actually around skill development. And there's something I actually want to show you, maybe later on in one of our questions, around learning how to develop the skills of being a parent over a period of time. It's quite difficult because we want the best and we want it now, but that's not how it is really. And other things happen. Say for example, one of the big things that's affecting young people now around with their parents is there's been a lot of separation. And young people are having to cope with that. So how does the main parent or the parent, how do parents cope with that? That's a very, very tricky situation. And I believe that the only way to manage it is through dialogue. And that dialogue means speaking, listening. And most important part of speaking and listening is your capacity to reflect on what's being said. So are young people romanticizing the stigma of mental health issues? That is a really, really great question, because the three words there for me are romanticizing, stigma, and mental health. Okay? And they're questions actually that have been around for a long time, but that question has been asked in very, 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 very different ways. But one of the kind of exciting things for me, as somebody who around 25 years ago decided to train in the whole area of psychotherapy, that the whole issue around our mental health is being brought into the conversation. And that's something that's probably never ever really happened to the extent it's happening before. It's never happened before. So now it's happening, and I think it's absolutely wonderful, because it's like it's the missing piece. We talked about the ability to learn, so our cognition and our memory skills and all of that kind of thing. Everybody knew it was good to be active, to play sports. And now we're talking about the health of the mind. And I suppose the main ingredient in the mind is the thought. And the main ingredient about where does that thought come from? Well, a guy called Sigmund Freud, in a book called Dreams and Reality, I think that was the name. I might have to go back to that. He discovered the existence, let's say, of the unconscious. And it was a bit like Einstein's E equals mc squared, that it was like such a major discovery. So now it's a bit like that happened around 1880, 1890. So now we're beginning to it's taken that length of time for us to kind of bring it fully into consciousness, the whole mental health thing. So the mental is the mind, what's in the mind is the thought, and of course, where's the thought coming from? It's coming from the unconscious or the subconscious, and from the environment as well. So I could say something to you and then you'll have a thought about that straight away. But you're there on your own in a quiet room in, Spanish Point or wherever, or sitting on the Cliffs of Moher or somewhere, you'll have thoughts coming into your head. Where are those thoughts coming from? You're in a room, you're in your own room before you go to sleep at night. It's dark, the thoughts start appearing. Where do they come from? And Freud would say, and I would agree with this, they're coming from the unconscious, and they're coming from memory, and it's so it's quite complicated. So now we're talking about mental health. So now we're talking about thoughts. But we can't take that in isolation. I think this is to me, this is the really important thing. We can't just talk about mental health. We have to talk about physical health. We have to talk about brain health and brain development. As I said earlier on, the brain is the last organ in the body to fully develop, with all the synapses connecting up when you're 25. So So the thoughts are in a very kind of unstable organ. When I say I call the adolescent period the mushy brain syndrome, the mushy brain department, because the brain isn't fully joined up, and yet we're having all these thoughts, and we're talking about mental health, and we're talking about physical health, and we're talking about lots and lots of things, and there's lots going on, and we can't make sense of it, and we can't make sense of it, and it's so tricky. So I don't actually think we're romanticizing it. I think we need to have probably conversations around mental health with a lot more clarity. So, for example, if I was, and I will be now, say, in a couple of weeks' time, speaking to a group of teachers around having conversations with children in classrooms, right? One of the things I will do in that conversation is that I will show them images of the brain and how certain parts of the brain, say around organizational skills, they're not fully developed. So what they need to do, what teachers need to do then is allow that space for that bit to develop, so that, the young person can feel a little bit more secure in who they're emerging into. So that's really, really important. The mental health thing should be a lifelong experience, because the thoughts are never going to go away. So we need to learn how to manage, cope, and make those thoughts, understand them more fully. But just to focus in on something that is, wrong. And there's the thing too, the stigma around mental health is that there's something wrong with me. I have a big theory that there's actually absolutely nothing wrong with anybody per se. Now, look, there are 0.5% of the population of any country that, have had traumatic experiences that, lead them to have to be looked after. But by and large, generally speaking, there's nothing wrong with any of us. But I might feel a little bit depressed. I might feel a little bit anxious. I might feel very anxious sometimes. I might feel really depressed sometimes. But I'm still saying there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a normal process. So if we were just to focus in on it, we might be stigmatizing it. But if we were to broaden it out and make it part of the whole experience, then I think we become to accept it as normal and okay and manageable. And maybe sometimes it's okay for it to be unmanageable, and that we sit with the Now that's the tricky bit, because we tend to sometimes try to turn to something else when it becomes unmanageable. So again, we have to teach young people, and ourselves as well as adults, we have to teach how to manage those difficult situations. So one of my big talking points with adults and with young people is our instinctual response to challenging situations around mental health. So for example, if I feel a little bit anxious about something, my natural reaction, my instinctual response is the ancient instinctual response of fight, flight, freeze. And I'm introducing a new one. There's a fawning goes on as well. But I'll talk about, if you want me to talk about that, I will. But generally speaking, what people do is they fight it. So the young boys especially will fight, get into trouble and drive fast cars. Some will, girls, now that's really important too. There is a different response from boys and girls as well, but I don't want to make them any better or different or worse, or, they're just different, So, and then some people will tend to withdraw their flight. They'll go, a lot of people will remove themselves from football teams, drama, some kids remove themselves from school, some adults remove themselves from the workplace. There's your flight response. Some people freeze. They don't know what to do at all, so they never say a word. We know these people in our classrooms. We know these people. They could be our brother or sister. They could be our parents. They find the whole thing so difficult that they freeze. So, if we totally concentrate on one particular aspect, maybe then we're stigmatizing it and romanticizing it. I suppose we got to be careful now. When the question was asked, this is a very tricky question, but I talk about a very tricky thing to talk about, and the whole issue of suicide. In the time of Freud, that time in Vienna, just at the turn of the 1900s, actually suicide became romantic. It was almost a romantic thing to do. So we got to be very careful about the way we think about our mental health. That's why I'm saying that if we were just to think of mental health in isolation, I think we're going to make mistakes that are, will be hard to deal with. But if we think of mental health in relation to every other type of health, then I think we will take the romanticism bit out of it, and we'll take the stigma out of it as well, but we'll be talking about it. And that's really, I think that's the really, really, really important thing to talk about, get the conversation happening. Now I do want to talk about one other aspect of the mental health thing that's really a kind of, it's not a popular thing for me to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I think this is a conversation we really, really, really need to have in this country at a really deep level. So again, this is my third time to say this in this interview. The brain doesn't develop until 25. So what does that mean? So what that means actually is that the synapses, all the bits that join up and all the makes, it's quite a complicated, I don't know fully about the brain, but all the bits that make it what it becomes aren't fully joined up, okay? So it's a difficult space to live in. If you introduce, this is the part where people are going to give out to me now, if you introduce alcohol into that brain, because the alcohol goes straight into the brain really quickly, at a very young age, 13, 14, 15, 16, using that over an extended period of time, that can have a massive effect on brain development. And I'm frightened by young people that I meet, their use of alcohol. Not a one-off, not a once, we'll all do it once or twice or three times and make a kind of illuder out of ourselves, but over an extended period of time, and I see that happening quite a lot, that young people, 15, 16, 17, have incorporated alcohol quite into their social lives very early, and often it's been supported by parents as well. That's the bit that parents might not want to hear. The parents need to bring that one back a little bit, and maybe they need to think about their own use of alcohol, because monkey see, monkey do. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. Say, well, if my mother, and that goes back to mobile phone use as well. Adults will be giving out about mobile phones, but sometimes you see adults, including myself, use the mobile phone, and the young person is there as well. Now, the other major one, which is a massive one around mental health, is the use of drugs. Be they legal or illegal, but probably illegal. And there's a big debate around saying, I just concentrate on one drug at the moment, and that's cannabis. Okay? Now, I actually think that this is a bit controversial and a bit sensitive, but it alters the brain chemistry. And if the brain isn't fully developed and doesn't know where it's settling into, it can have a major impact. Again, it's not so much the once off or the twice off or the three times use, it's the constant use over a period of time. So, and that can have a major impact on mental health and brain development, and it can actually lead to very, 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 very serious psychotic experiences for young people. And I'm meeting an increased number of young people like that, and I am concerned, and we need a conversation around that, so that we don't I think we have romanticised alcohol. We romanticise drug use. They're in society, they're not going away. We need to have conversations about them. We need to have conversations about what's good about them and what's not so good about them. But we're having the conversation. And I think that's really, really good. And we can't, as I say, if we just talk about it in isolation, we're going to get it wrong. We have to talk about it in relation to the whole young person's experience. And finally, the mind, the brain, it's like any muscle. You need to train it. So I would have worked with. I'm a group psychotherapist, and I was referred people who had been in the psychiatric, using the psychiatric services. And this is a very kind of general statement, but, their psychotic experiences, the experiences that led them into unwellness was overthinking. lack of sleep, drug use, alcohol use, and also the environment of the family. So it can become quite complicated on that level. But it was those four or five, and they're things that do affect young people now too. So, for example, this is a message I want to get really out. Really, really, young people need sleep, so they shouldn't have their mobile phones in their bedroom, and they need a break from that social media platform. So, we need to pull back. We need to pull back on the thoughts that the young people are having all the time. Now, I know I've moved slightly off the question, but it is around mental health and the stigma. But we need to be mindful that mental health is an issue, but we need to do a lot of training around it, a lot of managing around it, and a lot of thought around it. But that it's been included in the conversation, I think that's really good. When I was growing up, just got on with it, do what you're told, do your leaving cert, go to college, get a job, blah, 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 blah. Nobody ever asked you, ever, how are you feeling? Nobody ever did that. And it wasn't out of badness or anything. It's that they were never asked. So now things are changing, and we're now wondering how young people are feeling. We should ask the question. We should ask the question of ourselves: how are we feeling? So that we're having that conversation, so that we're opening up that what I call an emotional landscape. And to open up an emotional landscape, you need a language. You need an emotional language. It's like going into a new country. We need a language for that new country, and however that happens is great. And sometimes romanticizing or stigmatizing it, it could happen, but at least the conversation's happening. So that's a great question. What should a young person do if they encounter an episode where they feel highly anxious or highly depressed? And what I would say straight away is that it is going to happen. We're all going to feel anxious at some point. Sometimes it's kind of low anxiety, mid anxiety, and then it's high anxiety. We're all going to feel slightly depressed, kind of depressed, but sometimes we feel really, really depressed. It's going to happen. I think that young people need to know that that's what's actually going to happen. So what are they going to do? Well, the really important thing is that they connect in with an adult of some description. Now, it doesn't have to be their parents. And I think schools at this point really are kind of set up, by and large, they're set up to cope with young people who are experiencing anxiety or depression on that continuum. For example, we have the National Education Psychology Service, NEPS. So if there's an issue, through your guidance counsellor or through your year head in school, you could contact somebody. But the core message is you have to contact an adult. What you shouldn't be doing is you shouldn't be going on your social media saying, what should I do to your friends? Because as I was saying earlier on, adolescence is around a massive period of change on many, many different levels. So knowing what to do, I did this and I did that, somebody else over there, it might work for you. So you need to connect in with somebody with some experience. That's really, really important. The acceptance that it's a natural part of growing up is really, really important as well. And I would suggest actually people should watch the movie Inside Out. That is really, really, really brilliant. It was a movie that came out again. Walt Disney produced it about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's about a young person's experience of moving with her family from one part of America to another. And what they do then is they go inside and they have the different emotions that are conversing with one another. And it's a really brilliant way of seeing how challenging being a young person is, but that there are ways of coping and managing. I never talk about solutions in mental health. We never solve anything. We cope, we manage, we move forward. Or we take our time and sit.